Good morning. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes.
Buenos días, vamos a estar comenzando nomás en un par de minutitos.
Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes.
Buenos días, gracias por acompañarnos. Vamos a estar comenzando nomás en un par de minutitos.
All right. I think we've reached critical mass. We'll go ahead and get started.
Muy bien, ya parece que estamos con la gente necesaria, así que vamos a estar comenzando.
Welcome. Thank you for joining this Zoom for a discussion of 3 pathways to 30 by 30. My name is Melanie Schlotterbeck, and I will be moderating this session today for Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks. You'll see we are in webinar format on the Zoom platform, which means the icons at the bottom may be a little bit different than you normally see. Today's content is being live simulcast into Spanish, and now our interpreter will translate this introduction before being moved into the Spanish audio channel.
Bienvenidos a todos, gracias por acompañarnos a este Zoom para una discusión sobre las tres estrategias hacia 30 por 30. Mi nombre es Melanie Schlotterbeck y hoy moderaré esta sesión para amigos de puertos, playas y parques. Verá que estamos en formato de seminario web en la plataforma Zoom. Esto significa que los iconos en la parte inferior pueden ser un poco diferentes de lo que normalmente ve. El contenido de hoy se transmite en vivo simultáneamente en español y ahora nuestra intérprete, que soy yo, Mercedes, traducirá esta introducción antes de pasarla al canal de audio en español.
Every slide has yellow text to match the English version of the content.
Cada diapositiva tiene texto amarillo para que coincida con la versión en inglés del contenido.
And should you need interpretation services, please click on the globe icon and select Spanish.
Y si necesita servicios de interpretación, haga clic en el icono del globo terráqueo y seleccione español.
Should you need assistance with closed captioning, that is offered as well. Simply click the Show Captions icon. During today's presentation, we will be accepting questions via the Q&A icon. If you click it, you have the option to ask a question by typing into the box and then selecting to be anonymous or not and clicking the send arrow on the bottom right. Finally, limited interactions will occur during the Zoom in the chat, as this is only being used to pass information on to our participants. If you need something other than a question, click on the chat icon and type your message and click send. Today's event is being recorded and posted to the Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks YouTube channel. If you miss any portion, need to see something again, or registered but couldn't make it, This entire workshop will be available online. And now that we have the basics out of the way, let me acknowledge that the state of California exists on occupied territory of over 110 federally recognized and over 70 non-federally recognized tribes. These lands have been stewarded by Native nations since time immemorial. These lands and waters have significance to the indigenous people of California. Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks' work is focused on the ancestral homelands of the Ahachiman, Juanino, and Gabrielino people. We pay respect to the indigenous people whose land was forcibly colonized and recognize the importance of the tribal relationship to the land, past, present, and future. Actions you can take to curb cultural erasure include reading about local tribes, donating to tribally led organizations, and engaging with tribes in your work. Today's workshop is brought to you by the nonprofit Friends of Harbors, Beaches, and Parks, or FHBP for short, and we work to protect the natural lands, waterways, and beaches in Orange County, California. We are grateful for the grant funding that allows these workshops to be made available. The FHBP team working on this webinar includes myself as the panel moderator. We also have Mercedes Merlot, our interpreter, and Giovanni DeFranco, who is staffing the chat and Q&A. This series is in partnership with the statewide Power in Nature Coalition, which coordinates the grassroots effort for 30 by 30. And if you've not heard of 30 by 30, let me tell you a little bit about that initiative. Governor Gavin Newsom signed Executive Order N82-20, which set the goal to protect 30% of California's lands and waters by 2030. It's shortened to 30 by 30. This isn't just a California effort, it's a local, state, national, and international effort. The agency responsible for overseeing the implementation of 30 by 30 is the California Natural Resources Agency, or CNRA. There are 3 pillars to 30 by 30, which includes biodiversity, access to nature, and climate resilience. And I do want to give a shout out to Senator Dave Min for his bill SB 337, which was signed by the governor, which codifies 30 by 30. CNRA released on Earth Day, April 22nd, last year, a document called Pathways to 30 by 30, which identifies 10 different strategies on how we will achieve 30 by 30. We're grateful to have with us today 3 subject matter experts, including Matthew Tutimez, who is an enrolled member of the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians, Keech Nation, and has served as a tribal biologist since 2010. Matthew has been designated by his tribe to possess and share Keech Gabrielino cultural knowledge and practices taught to him by Chief Ernie P. Tutimez Salas, along with elders of the Keech Gabrielino tribe. Mr. Tutimez received both his Bachelor's of Science and Master's of Science degree in biology from Cal State University, Long Beach, and is the tribe's specialist in ethnobotanical and cultural uses of native plants and animals, including the prehistoric distributions of natural resources throughout the ancestral territory of the Keech Gabrielino tribe. We also have with us today Tori Chair. She's the executive director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, a nonprofit organization that strives for equity and justice in creating and preserving green spaces in under-resourced communities. She has a master's degree and a license in landscape architecture and has, over the last 10 years, experience in advancing community health through projects and policies that foster access to fresh food, stormwater capture, and green space development. She leads the identification, planning, and development of new parks and gardens throughout the greater Los Angeles County, collaborating with partners and community stakeholders to address their needs and priorities. Tori is passionate about making LA a greener and healthier space. We also have Julie Torini. She focuses on conservation financing, real estate transactions, and conservation philanthropy, with particular emphasis on providing strategic advice in structuring guidelines and procedures for program-related investments and projects. Before joining Resources Legacy Fund, Julie served as a senior attorney for the Nature Conservancy California program. And in that capacity, she provided legal support for real estate acquisitions and dispositions, government and private grant and loan financing, and stewardship matters for the, oh, I might not say this right, Cosumnes River, the Delta and Northern Sierra projects. Previously, Julie was a partner with various Sacramento law firms focusing on commercial real estate, land conservation, low-income housing, and general corporate matters. And she's a graduate of UC Davis School of Law. We're delighted to have all three of these presenters with us today. Each presentation topic will have about 12 minutes to cover their material and answer a few questions afterwards. So we encourage you to add your questions into the Q&A window so that we can track them there. We've scheduled plenty of time at the end for Q&A as well, so don't be disheartened if your question isn't answered immediately. First up is Matthew Tutimez explaining pathway number 9, which is promoting complementary conservation measures.
Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Very nice to meet you. I'm currently on the East Coast, so it's afternoon for me. But again, my name is Matthew Tutimez, and today I'm going to be speaking about pathway number 9, promoting complementary conservation measures, which comes from the tribal focus. But first, before we get started, I want to provide a few minutes right now honoring my uncle, who was the effort that taught me a lot of the traditional knowledge. As Melanie explained, I was able to go to school and learn the science from, our universities, but it's my uncle who provided the traditional knowledge that now, together with the science and the traditions, our tribe is able to explain some of these components that we're going to explain today, especially about the 30 by 30. But first, when my uncle always did presentations, he would always start it off with a prayer. And so I'm fortunate enough to have a recording of him, because my uncle passed away a few years ago, 2021. And we all miss him. And so we've been able to collect some of his prayers. And this is one of them about the 4 directions. So just to start us off, I guess, in a correct mindset, if you join with me to hear my uncle.
Let us pray to the 4 directions: the east, the south, the west, norte. The east represents the light of wisdom, illumination, freshness, peace, and understanding. From the south comes the power of life, brutality, growth, and warmth. From the west represents of maturity, autumn, rain, snow, thunder, and also death, or the quality of things coming to an end. And from the north comes the cold, purifying winds, the cleansing of austerity, the strength of endurance, and the white snows and hairs of old age. Nawika, Aok, Anek, Tamik, Kwata, Tayai, Hanuka, Aho.
Thank you for joining me in that. So again, my name is Matthew Tutimez. I'm the tribal biologist for the Gabrielino Band of Mission Indians Keech Nation. I also am the director of a nonprofit called Laboratory for Indigenous Knowledge Systems. Its acronym is LINKS, and it's meant to link scientific knowledge with this traditional ecological knowledge that my uncle has been able to teach me. But what we're going to talk about today, and then actually one more thing that I got myself involved in, I'm actually also now chairman of the Tribal Advisory Committee for Cali, PA. And so that gives me an opportunity to be able to speak with all the boards, departments, and offices within the purview of Cali, PA, which is our Cal Recycle, our water boards, our DTSC, our toxic substances, a few others that are instituted within these different pathways. And so the opportunities that I have to have these discussions is what I'm going to be speaking about today. The pathway number 9, known as the complementary conservation measures, it's quite interesting just from the tribal perspective. We would hope that the concepts and the ideas that we're bringing to the table, which we have been bringing for the past few years now, are not just considered, complementary, but actually are the goals that we're all going to try and achieve. And this is what I'm getting at. Much of these complementary measures, if you see some of the words that I pulled out of the document for the 30 by 30, is that it says more work is needed to better understand and measure how complementary conservation measures support. So truthfully, the state is not aware of these initiatives or these concepts or these practices that are inherent within tribes within California, but is not known by the state. And this is this relationship building that needs to happen in order to now get more of these complementary ideas. And you see that these ideas are actually supported by the Natural Resource Agency, which is the complementary agency to Cali, PA within the state. And these agencies are trying to ensure that these strategies are implemented. So the agencies are after it. They just don't really know how these complementary alternatives will work. And so data is now needed. And that's actually one of the purposes of Links, that the nonprofit that I've started, is to create some of this data that we know these strategies will work. However, it's not known to the state yet how to utilize these strategies in a scientific form. But what they've suggested is to have nature-based solutions. And this sort of concept is something that is inherent within all of tribal ecological knowledge, because it all surrounds this resource, or from what our perspective is, these gifts that we were provided by our creator. And let me go a little bit further into that. Here's the picture that everyone looks at of what Southern California, around the LA basin, what it used to be like. And this sort of grandeur that we had here is something that isn't far lost on us. We have stories of some of even our own tribal members. Actually, my uncle's dad, so our chief's dad, used to live off of the river, the Santa Ana River, because he lived out in Miraloma, off the Santa Ana River, and his ranch up until the late 70s, till his community out in Miraloma put in their first grocery store. So even here in the LA basin, the land provided and supported for all his sustenance up until the 70s, just a few decades ago. But yet today, our concept of our land is simply to look at it, but not engage with it. And that's the big difference in our complementary methods that we are pursuing, because our land, as you see in this photo, provides all your food, all your medicine, all your shelter, all of these needs that the human needs within the basin were provided by our landscape. But however, today, they're not. And that's the big difference. If we're going to be, protecting lands and conserving lands, what are we going to do with them? What's the purpose of conserving these lands? Just to put them off to the side like we do now and put fences around it and don't let people in there and just let it be fuel for fire? Because that's what's happening to a lot of our conservation lands is we're just leaving them alone, and then they're burning up. And they're burning up in these high intensity fires because we have so much biomass and so much fuels that are just invading into our natural landscapes because we don't treat the land like we used to. And how did we used to treat the land? It was tended like a garden. Here's the big thing. Agriculture and farming was not needed here because the land provided everything within seasons of all your needs, all your nutritional needs, all your medicinal needs, all of your structural needs were always provided by the land because the folks always tended it like a garden. They would use regeneration practices such as with our cactus, being able to prune it at the right time or being able to take off pads will then regenerate more pads. And guess what? This is nopales. This is good food. You not only get to eat the fruit, you get to eat the pads as well. And this is an essential plant for one of my favorite birds, the California cactus wren, being that that's what I did my master's thesis on. So anyway, the processes that used to be used, such as here in pruning. I want to focus your attention on when you actually manage the land and actually engage with it, you're getting more growth structure out of our plants rather than just letting them go wild. Because letting the land go wild was never a portion of how the land was stewarded. It was always taken care of so that it would then provide you with what you needed. That was the reciprocal relationship that occurred. The relationship that needs to still be encouraged is this relationship of understanding the values of our land, and by doing these practices, these traditional practices of managing the land will actually provide you with way more ability to get all these valuable resources. And what resources am I talking about? Therapeutic medicines and nutritional foods. Here in LA, this is what I was referring to a little bit earlier. All of our food, our medicine, all the structures, back in the day, they were provided by the creator. Today, all of our food, our medicine, all of our structure is now provided by man. And that transition of our dependence being put on man importing all of these necessities into Los Angeles is what's turning into a big scare for the survival of our population here in the LA basin. Because we've already seen these frantic times that, we have these scares and all of a sudden, all of our water has gone from the shelves. All of a sudden, there's no more toilet paper on the shelves. All of these commodities that are necessary for daily life are now being gone because man is taking care of us. What I want to explain right now is when we allow the creator to take care of us and allow the land, the earth, to be able to provide like it's provided, here's some of the resources that we're missing out on. Elderberry. I just want to go in. I'm just going to now go into a bunch of science, and I hopefully will try and slow down, but I may be a little quick here. So I'm sorry for the interpreter. Elderberry, if you look at some of the Uto-Aztecan language that goes along with elderberry, you'll see that elderberry had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names for it. When a culture puts a name towards an item, it gives it importance. This had 6 names for it. And that reality shows that this one tree that we have here on our landscape, plentiful, that no one uses anymore, was so valuable back then that they gave it so many names. Now, how can we use it today? Well, today, you're already seeing it being used in Walmart. I mean, in a lot of our why am I blanking on the word? The pharmacies. I'm sorry. The pharmacies, you're going to see a product called Sambucol. This is directly derived from elderberry. And what I'm showing up here is the medicinal power that elderberry has, because elderberry is able to stop the flu virus, not only when it's getting ready to attack you, but when it's actually virulent and attacking you. Elderberry has the ability to squash any of the HN variations of the flu. So now, why aren't any of us using any of this elderberry that has this capacity? Actually, I've been using it quite readily this winter, and it has been having a very beneficial effect for keeping at bay these different illnesses that are going around in our community right now. Then we go on to chia. What about chia? Chia is something that we see as one of these now superfoods that are within our stores, our health food stores. But do many people know that chia is native here and was one of the main food resources that the original people would then spread amongst? It was one of the main traded items that was spread all around the basin and beyond. And when the Spanish first came, one of the first gifts they were given was chia, because chia is so valuable because it's a capsule of life. It's a seed. Any seed that you ingest, you are now ingesting all the necessary elements of life, being magnesium, phosphorus, linoleic acid, all of these components that are necessary for your cells to be able to fix themselves, to be able to heal themselves. This is all available, and chia has the capacity to hold water. So when you soak it in water and then you ingest it, you are now having time-release capsules of water in your body. So you're having all these great benefits from one seed that used to grow here. Then you go into this plant, which is Pluchia odorata. Pluchia odorata is one of our wetland plants that grows out in the our wetlands that unfortunately aren't there anymore. However, science has already proven that it has these anti-cancer properties that none of us are taken advantage of. And these properties have been found to actually be so pronounced that they can trigger the apoptosis effect, or the death trigger is what this article is stating, for these abnormal cells, which we call cancer cells. And this plant actually can find it, can stabilize it, and then can program it into death. That reality is, why aren't we using it? It's one of our common, it's called marsh fleabane, Pluchia odorata, one of our common wetland plants. None of us know about it. Why? It's one of our common wetland plants. This component, let me just mention another component. It says that it was even more pronounced than what the current drug Taxol provides. Taxol is an anti-cancer medicine that is currently on the market today that uses the Pacific yew. So this is a tree from up north, Northern California. And this is a relationship that occurred between the bark and the tree and a fungus that lives in that intermediate area. With this relationship, the fungus would provide this very useful compound to the tree for defenses. Well, scientists back in the 60s found out, hey, we can use this for anti-cancer components. And they actually created all of these drugs from that. Well, Pluchia has the same thing and is even noted to be stronger. Why aren't we making medicines out of that?
Matt, I'm going to interrupt and tell you should start wrapping up.
Oh
So
my
we're not out
goodness,
of
I'm
time.
2 minutes in. All right, so crassifolium, here's another one. back in the 60s, it wasn't used for FDA, so therefore it's not instituted into any of our medicines, but it was all instituted. It was actually put into the pharmacopoeia of Spain because it was so valuable. Then we get into food, and this is my favorite subject. I'm so sorry, guys, that I can't talk too much about it, but even Junipero Serra stated in his diary that when they came to this land, the natives needed nothing but food. They had plenty of food, where a lot of the misinterpretation during the mission times is that the natives didn't have food. No, there was plenty of food because the land provided it all. And why are we not using these foods? Why are we not using, the compounds that are so nutritious that actually will help with inflammation, that will help with, our nutrition, that will help with all of these elements that we're lacking? But yet we're not looking at these conservation areas to fulfill, making them into food forests, into shrub gardens, using current lands to actually facilitate so we can actually make medicines. We do this as a tribe. That's what we're currently doing. But these strategies aren't being used because there's no scientific data to support it, according to the state. So therefore, these alternatives or these complementary methods are methods that should be our primary methods, because they're going to be the ones that provide us with food, medicine, shelter for our future generations. Because that's the way we got to start thinking, is what's going to be used for the future, not what we need now, but what our kids and their grandkids are going to need for the future. So, and so much more I want to talk to you guys about, but I thank you so much for giving me that little bit of time, and I look forward to the questions at the end.
Perfect. So I'll encourage folks to drop questions into the Q&A online and we can get to those. But two questions for you right now. One is this connection between people and the land. How is your tribe working to improve not only with your tribal members, but I'll just generically say the public, making sure people have connections to the land?
So for us, it's all about the relationship. We feel that this relationship has been broken in our generation. None of us know about, what an oak tree supports, what type of pollinators does an oak tree support? What type of, substrate are within the soil in your backyard? All of these components are necessary components for us to learn about, to create relationships, because once we create the relationship, that item is going to benefit us. And then once we see those benefits, then we want to start protecting it. And that's what our strategy is we want people to engage and start building those relationships again. That's what we feel all traditional ecological knowledge is just having this relationship, understanding our native plants and animals, not the imported stuff, but the stuff we've already been given, the stuff that lived here and lives here still. And so that's our hope, is to bring people to engage and to actually utilize these components so that they have a different value system for them, rather than just seeing them out in nature and they're just for the birds and the bees. No, they're for humans. That's what they're here for. But we need to engage with them and support them, then they will support us.
Great. A second follow-up question I'm going to couch as an opportunity. So Governor Newsom has advanced tribal consultation, engagement with tribal nations and tribal leaders. How has this advanced what your tribe is trying to do, either statewide or locally? Has it helped? Is it not enough?
So here's the reality. It's good that it's happening, but from our perspective, we're taking advantage of these opportunities, but the voice that we're speaking, and this is why I'm saying data is needed. This is the unfortunate thing. They just won't take our word for it. They need data, and I'm talking about they being the state. The state needs data in order to facilitate our recommendations or our concerns. Let me just give you one quick example. Air Resources Board was creating all these little out of raw material, all these little sensors, so that we know where our greenhouse gases are coming down at the year 2050, because we're supposed to have zero at the year 2050, right? Well, they're creating all these sensors. So during the meeting when they were telling the Tribal Advisory Committee about this, I raised my hand and I say, hey, do you guys know about black sage? And then everyone looks at me like queerly, what? I go, do you know that black sage actually can measure the amount of sulfur dioxide in our atmosphere because it sclerotizes or it hardens when it gets exposed to sulfur dioxide? And therefore you can actually use that plant as a indicator itself, and the plant will even remove carbon dioxide and do all these other things you want it to do. It's not just a sensor, it's a multi-sensor. They said, wow, this is interesting information. This was about 4 years ago I told them this. Wow, this is interesting information. Hey, Matt, can you send me that article, that a scientific article? Sure, guys, here you go. Just about a year ago, they ended up coming back, talking to the Tribal Advisory Committee again and saying, hey, here's the sensors we just built for that. And I asked, what about the black sage? Why are we using raw materials? Why are we using taxpayer money to create raw materials to create these sensors when I was explaining 4 years ago how the black sage could do it? Well, we didn't do any investigation into black sage, so therefore, so it's these ideas where we're presenting ideas on how we can utilize these nature-based solutions, but in reality, the state already has their mindset. And these that's why our ideas are considered complementary, not anything that is to be pursued as the primary. And that's the part that we are still disengaged. The state is still thinking their way in their little box, and now they're open to it. So that's what the governor has opened these doors, but in no way are we invited in and using our strategies yet, unless you have your own land and you do it on your own land. But they are not allowed to be done on public land yet, only on private land. That's the only place in San Diego is where I'm doing a lot of stuff. I'm doing oak woodlands and making them into food forests. But I can't do that on any park lands. I can't do that on any public lands because they don't trust it. They don't trust that it can be done because there's no data to back it up, even though there's thousands of years of human habitation on this landscape that has proven it, but yet the state needs the data. And that's where the misconnect is coming. The governor is opening up these opportunities, but the actual use of these suggestions from tribes, at least from my point from the Tribal Advisory Committee in Cali, PA, I have not seen that been put into practice.
Sounds like there's a lot of work to do. So I will encourage folks to continue to drop questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentation. At this point, I'm going to pass the presentation slide opportunities over to Tori with the LA Neighborhood Land Trust. The Land Trust is doing important work in urban acquisition, that arena. So Tori, go ahead and begin.
Thank you so much, Melanie. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk for about 12 minutes about the Land Trust's work, and I'm happy to continue the conversation after this if there's anyone here in LA or around the state that's interested in learning more about how to figure out how to really get a hold of some of these properties and transform them into green spaces, habitat, biodiversity hotspots, all of the kind of priorities that fit within 30 by 30. So really quick, I'm just gonna jump in to the LA Neighborhood Land Trust. We are a 20-year-old nonprofit that was formed by a number of elected officials to help address park equity access in the city of Los Angeles. Since this time, we've expanded countywide, and we have developed 29 parks and gardens, and we have many more in the works. And with each of these projects, actually getting access to a property is really kind of the first step for many of them. So we focus on equity. We work in low-income communities of color throughout Los Angeles County. We believe that access to nature directly in people's communities, access to places, any green space is really critical to quality of life and health and well-being of communities. And we do this really in multiple ways. We do organizing with communities. We build, operate, and maintain parks. We are a land trust, so we own property, but we also support cities and other communities around the county in developing or renovating their green spaces. And we also do a fair amount of advocacy, and one of our primary advocacy areas right now is how to transform schoolyards into vibrant green spaces with a lot of great habitat. So this is just briefly our model, and I brought this up and put this here because I just want to talk about how the community is really the center of the work that we're doing, and we really think about it from an equitable development framework. And so we don't just kind of fly in, buy a property, turn it into a park. We actually integrate community engagement through the whole process and really start with asking community members, what do they want to see and what's working and how are they using their green spaces. Sometimes what they'll tell us is they just want to renovate an existing park. But sometimes they'll say, we want a new garden, we want a new park. And these are some sites that we identified. And this is kind of a circular process. It doesn't stop or end. It's really kind of community engagement is integrated again fully throughout the whole process. So really quickly for LA County specifically, LA County actually has a large amount of open space, but the open spaces are located kind of on the perimeters, not in the places where many people are actually living. And especially low-income communities of color have significantly less access to those kind of regional green spaces, the national forests, all of the kind of protected land on the perimeters. This is a map of LA County from the LA County Park Needs Assessment, a really amazing needs assessment that County Parks conducted back in 2016 that looked at all of the available open space and started to identify where the gaps are. These are gaps that I think we all kind of already knew, but it's really helpful to have them captured here. And you can see the red and the orange, that's South Central Los Angeles. The red and the orange kind of in the upper portion of the map. A lot of that is Pacoima, San Fernando Valley, and then to the right is the eastern side is San Gabriel Valley. So these are communities where we're actively working, and we really focus our acquisition efforts and development efforts in these urban areas. And we do this because, again, we're focused on health, and we know that park and green space access actually corresponds with life expectancy. So the communities that you see in orange here were the same ones that you saw in red on the previous slide. And there's a life expectancy, about a 10-year life expectancy difference between Watts and Beverly Hills. So this slide I just like to include, this is an aerial view of Watts, and you can just see how little green there is. There's just astonishing, it's just so little green space, not even trees. So kind of jumping into the topic of, you know, strategic land acquisition, we are required to get creative in urban areas. There's not just, we don't have the benefit of having large parcels just kind of sitting around, pristine parcels sitting around waiting to be kind of purchased and then transformed into parks. So we have to get very creative. We have to really be ready to take on, you know, some challenging situations around, you know, environmental cleanup, complicated partnership agreements with public utilities, the works, you name it. This is not for the faint of heart, but it is 100% doable. And there's always a path generally to figure out land ownership, even on, you know, complicated, contaminated properties or public rights of ways. So as we're thinking about opportunities for new open spaces, this is a list that we typically kind of think about. So if we're in South LA working with a number of partners and community members to identify a new park, we would look at what's available in terms of right of ways, what types of kind of surplus properties or remnant properties. Oftentimes there's weird small triangles or long skinny rectangles or just kind of funky, weird leftover spaces that can sometimes work, if not for a park, but for a community garden. We like to look at other public properties. Schools are a priority for us, and we believe that schools should be opened and greened throughout LAUSD and LA County. And then small residential scale properties sometimes are available, as well as occasionally just the random commercial and industrial site. So I would say any place you see a vacant property, there's the potential that it could become a park or open space, but there is a fair amount of due diligence and kind of legwork to figure out kind of, is there a path and is the community interested and does it make sense? So on that note, I just want to again say as we get started in thinking about an acquisition, we start with where the community is. We talk to them, find out what their priorities are. We talk about what do they want to see, what's missing, what would they actually use and what are they interested in. So this is kind of the first place. I just want to make sure that that's kind of there, and then getting into really thinking about these complex sites. And so we will look at, you know, all of the ownership databases, assessor's office. We'll start to understand who owns a property, what is there, what are kind of the potential ways that people could actually access this site, and does it make sense for a park or green space? And that I think is really important. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. But first, kind of this process. So engaging the community, understanding who's going to own and operate a property. We raise and fund most of our projects through California State, LA County, LA City funding. So public funding is how we kind of are able to pull off these projects. Most of the public agencies want to see that you actually have land tenure, you have a willing seller, you have someone that's going to engage with you and participate. And at the end of the day, if they give you money, you can actually complete the acquisition of the property. So understanding who's going to own it and also who's going to maintain it. As a land trust, we have a little bit of flexibility, but many times it's going to your local public agency, like a parks department, and asking if they are open to partnering and would be willing to kind of work with you on a property. Then, you know, identifying multiple sites. And I say multiple sites, I really mean like for like one potential property or project that we'll pursue, we've probably looked at like 50 or 60 sites. It is a long process, but it doesn't, you know, I think once you kind of work on it a little bit, you start to get the hang of it, and it's pretty straightforward. There's negotiations around the property or the lease agreement or kind of whatever you're looking at, kind of structuring this kind of acquisition. And that will kind of correspond also directly to the fundraising. So what will public agencies support? What will they not support? What do they want you to have before you pursue a grant? So going back to what I was previously saying about just because you found a vacant parcel does not mean it's actually a great fit for a park or open space. And that's why there's these 50 or many dozens of properties that we will look at. We, you know, want to make sure that it's in a right location where that's adjacent to like where people and neighborhoods and where people will go, that it's a good size for a garden or for a park, that the adjacent uses are not kind of, you know, exposing people to contaminants or uses that are not complementary. Understanding the level of contamination doesn't mean that we won't take on a property that has contamination, but we want to really understand what we're taking on, because could be liability, there could be all sorts of extra costs, and we just need to know. Understanding the property owner's expectation, and then making sure that it is a price that we could actually get funded through public funding. We can't just pay anything, we actually have to pay appraised value. So here's just a few examples of properties or projects that we've done on different types of properties. So this is our Jacaranda Park. It's actually owned and operated by the City of Los Angeles Department of Recreation and Parks. It's a park that was developed on basically an abandoned empty utility easement owned by the Department of Water and Power. There were existing jacaranda trees, luckily, because usually you can't plant trees on these types of easements. And then we were able to kind of work with the community to put together a project and get it funded. And so again, there's a path forward, but it's kind of understanding the challenges and the partners. This is another property that we acquired. We purchased this from the LA County Assessor's Office through a tax default purchase. So again, this was a property that was owned by a developer and they just kind of disappeared, and it sat vacant for decades. It was just an empty lot, and we were able to go in, negotiate with, or go in and sign up on this tax default list, and then submit an application and acquire it. We did have to pay, but it wasn't full market rate. It was just kind of the balance of taxes owed on the property. This is another project that's actually underway and will be opening in the next month or so. It's called Wishing Tree Park. It's an 8.5 acre former Superfund site. We obtained this through a property donation from Shell Oil. And it was there were significant environmental issues, and we just kind of worked our way through them. And now we are close to opening. And then last, this is a property we just acquired. We closed on a week ago. It's a 2-acre parcel in South Los Angeles near USC that was a former oil operating site. This was a straight up market rate purchase. We paid a lot of money for this property, and we're competing with other developers to purchase it. So it was a competitive process, but well worth it. And we were working in lockstep with the community. We had weekly meetings with the community on this for 3 years. So I'm out of time, so I'll just go back and just wrap up and say, acquiring property, bringing property into kind of community ownership, public ownership, bringing green space, more green space is such a critical part of this work. And we do believe it's a significant part of 30 by 30. We believe that urban projects are so critical to 30 by 30, and any way that we can kind of increase access to green space, increase cooling, bring in more habitat, bring in more California native plants that can serve as an educational kind of purpose is so important. And so I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions now or connect with folks later if there's a project you're looking at. Happy to kind of help kind of troubleshoot. And I will pass it back to Melanie.
Great, thanks, Tori. Let's do a couple of questions. One question, just kind of straight out of the presentation, you mentioned you paid a lot of money for the Jefferson Boulevard property. Give us some context for that. You know, some of us know that when you purchase an entitled property, it's going to be more expensive than unentitled. You know, wetlands are going to be more expensive along the coast than a mountain ecosystem.
Right.
What types of numbers are we talking about?
Yeah, so this property was 9.9 million. And it was below asking price. We were able to negotiate it down from 12.5 million. But this is a property that had active oil drilling on it for decades, up until about 2 years ago. And the community actually was integrated, like they were the ones that actually got the oil operating shut down. And, you know, you can see there's homes all around this site. So the people that are living here, to them, this became like really the value of the property was irrelevant because it was such an environmental justice issue for them to make sure that this property didn't get turned into market rate apartments or condos or other kind of, you know, uses that were not kind of wanted by neighbors in the community. And so This property was so expensive because it's 2 acres contiguous, it's flat, it's clean. We are still gonna have to do additional kind of high level cleaning, but the oil operations were shut down. And it's on active, there's public transportation, there's a lot of people that live nearby. It just kind of checked all the boxes for private developers. And so in this space, we were actively competing with private developers, and it required a lot of kind of creative negotiating with the oil company, which I would be happy to talk with anyone about, but it was quite a lot. It took us, we were talking to them this is a 4-year project just to get to the acquisition. That's the other thing I didn't mention, is the time that it can take. But so every project, every property is different. You don't know what the conditions are. You don't know what this property owner is going to expect. Sometimes you will go through a process and you won't come to agreement and they'll walk away and you'll have to kind of start someplace else. So there's no guarantee, but understanding kind of the context, the neighborhood, and kind of the value of the space, going into it as part of kind of your assessment of feasibility and then also strategy. And we knew this property was going to be expensive from the get-go. We just knew that the oil company was not going to be a friendly negotiator.
Yep. So you brought up 2 other topics that have actually been raised in the Q&A. One is transaction land values and how those are established. Are you required to do an arm's length appraisal process like a typical wildland acquisition?
Yes, we would need to do, we absolutely need to do an appraisal process, and it needs to be by a state. Sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so not thinking super clearly, but by a state approved appraiser. And if we were to use, every department within the state has different requirements for an acquisition, but if you go through state parks or resources agency, you typically have to go through a Department of Finance review, and there's a whole kind of process for kind of getting your appraisal approved before you can complete the acquisition. So it's quite a process. Of course, the public rights of ways you're not purchasing those, you are leasing those. So that's a different process, and there typically isn't money involved. So, sometimes you'll be in a community and you will have a project and you won't have any public funding readily available. And so you can get more creative and think about the public rights of ways or the schools. Those aren't perfect, but they are, or also surplus. Like, we're actually working with the city of LA on a surplus property right now that we're going to lease for free from the city for 25 years and turn it into a garden. So there's many options. And I always say, like, literally we have found projects just by looking at Google Maps, by driving around communities, and then also by talking to neighbors.
Excellent. So on the same theme of process, Garrett has a question on a typical timeline. You mentioned this one was 4 years, but what's normal?
Oh gosh, I don't think there is a normal. I think the normal is that just expect things to be complicated, frustrating at times. You are like, just prepare yourself to work through a lot of bureaucracy and red tape. And as long as you set up those expectations, and we always set those expectations with the community as well, then I think, you will just kind of go along for the ride. And some of this is, and I feel like there's a magic in doing projects where you don't actually necessarily know when you start what the project, where it's going to be, what it's going to look like, how much it's going to cost. And you have to kind of start and just jump in and know. Like with this site, the community came to us 4 years ago and said, oil operations are wrapping up. We want this property. Can you help us? They wanted it for a park originally, but we actually penciled out the numbers, and just a standalone park was going to be too difficult to fund. So we are actually going to be we're partnering with an affordable housing developer. So it's going to be joint affordable housing and park space and community center that the community is going to own. So there's I think there's many ways to kind of slice and dice these projects, and a lot of it is just kind of getting creative, and knowing that I would say typically for a project, it's a 2 to 5 year timeline. That's, ambitious. Sometimes it's longer. But because, the fundraising, pursuing public grants can take years. And then the design review, and then construction also takes years.
Great. Let's do one more question and then we'll move over to Julie's presentation. Megan is asking a question. Does anyone know if these sorts of neighborhood land acquisitions are happening in Orange County? And so that actually brings a follow-up question. Do you only work in LA? So.
Yeah, I actually know, like, through the grapevine of projects, and have heard of projects that are happening in Orange County. And we've actually been approached, and back when I worked at Trust for Public Land, we were trying to support a couple of projects in Orange County that were more on the urban side, less on the large kind of landscape side, which are both, of course, equally important, but that's my focus, is really the urban. So I am happy to talk to anyone working in Orange County or around the state. We do a lot of we provide a lot of just kind of behind the scenes support to folks as they're working on these projects, helping kind of think about funding and connections and where to go and brainstorm how to get it done. So if you want to reach out to me, I think Melanie has my contact information. I'd be happy to kind of follow up and schedule a call and have more of a conversation about what you're working on.
Perfect. We can get that added to the FHBP website with your contact info, so that anyone that has follow-up questions that we don't answer today can get them answered through you directly.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all your Land Trust is doing, especially in urban geographies, which we know is a different level of patience and tolerance and effort than what some folks deal with on the more wildland side of things, especially due to the lack of park space. So we appreciate all your hard work on that. And next up is Julie Torini with the Resources Legacy Fund. And Julie's going to be speaking about Pathway 8, which is how to maximize conservation investments. So Julie, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Trying to get to my slides. There we go. Getting there. First of all, Tori, I love the Jefferson Boulevard project. As a real estate attorney doing conservation parks and low-income housing work, it sort of checks all the boxes. So it's super cool to hear about that, and it's been a direction that I think conservationists have wanted to go along for a long time, and to see it happening on the ground is just super great. So again, thanks for the chance to spend some time with you this morning to talk about 30 by 30. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. We at Resources Legacy Fund have been involved in the 30 by 30 effort with the California Natural Resources agencies since inception, since that first executive order was issued by Governor Newsom. Just a little bit, I just want to share a little bit on the Resources Legacy Fund to give you a better sense of why we are at that table. We are a nonprofit 501c3 corporation with a mission to build alliances that advance bold solutions to secure a just and resilient world for people and nature. That's a lot of words. You've seen them many times before with other organizations as well. I think the thing to take away about Resources Legacy Fund is we work really closely with philanthropy to help them craft and implement grant and loan programs, working deeply in California, but also across the West and internationally. And one of our hallmark approaches to accomplish our goals is through public-private partnerships, particularly in California, where we have formally partnered with state natural resource agencies over the years to bring in private funding to help them expand the reach and the resources they have available to really implement their priority initiatives. You may have heard of the Parks Forward initiative. We worked on that with state parks. You probably have heard also of the Marine Life Protection Act, We've worked on that with Natural Resources Agency. And on 30 by 30, we entered into a collaborative agreement with the Natural Resources Agency to deliver philanthropic resources to provide myriad support, including project management support, technical writing, research, broad stakeholder engagement process, events coordination, and communications. And so we've really worked very closely with that staff, Jen Norris, when she was Deputy Secretary, and her team to really deliver the Pathways document and now to implement. So it's been super, super fun. This is all just context to get you to Pathway 8. Pathway 8, I like to call Pathway 8's calls for aligning investments to maximize conservation benefits. I like to call this the how do we pay for all this stuff pathway. Where is the bank? Because we all know we've seen so many reports from state agencies, federal agencies, really thoughtful with nice broad sets of recommendations, with commitments and calls of action, and admonitions that this will not sit on a shelf and just collect dust. But then the funding isn't put in place, so it really does just sit in the place. I would like to suggest to you that this Pathways to 30 by 30 is very much not one of those reports, because with the issuance of the report by CNRA, the agency, came a sort of very quick commitment of significant funds for implementing all of the actions, the 10 pathways. That's critical, as we all know, for just getting the work done on the ground, and frankly, getting the partners who are going to do the work to commit to do the work to build and develop the projects. They're not going to do that work if they don't know that there's money at the end of the day. Okay, now I'm going to go back one. I'm sorry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about public investment, and then I'm also going to talk about private investment / philanthropy. So on the public and investment side, talked about commitment of resources. Just as a sort of thumbnail sketch reminder, many of you may already know, in the 2021 and 2022 budget acts, the governor and legislature committed approximately $1.6 billion towards nature-based solutions over multiple years as a real down payment on the effort to pay for 30 by 30. Unfortunately, given the boom and bust of the state economy, you all know that after 2021, the revenues sort of decreased. And so there were some cuts in that funding, but 1.4 billion over multiple years was still secured. So this significant funding for nature-based solutions is now with agencies like the Wildlife Conservation Board and other state conservancies and agencies who are investing in solid projects that are now moving the needle to 30%. I think WCB is really a great example. Just a couple of weeks ago at its November meeting, it approved $116.6 million in grants to 37 diverse projects across the state. This is just sort of an insane level of investment. And if you look at the docket, and I hope you all have done that or are doing it, just to follow the array of projects and how they are sort of peppered across the state, and really starting to sort of outcomes on the land are really starting to bear fruit, and it's really exciting. Another example of the great funding, this is sort of on the innovative end, also sort of riffing off of Governor Newsom's commitment to supporting tribal entities, is the commitment of $100 million to the Natural Resources Agency for the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program. This is dedicated funding to tribal entities for projects and technical capacity. This is not money that other nonprofits that are not tribal based are able to access. This is just for tribes, which is super exciting because they don't have to compete except among tribal entities. They don't have to compete against the sort of full team of many nonprofits that have sort of worked the system for many, many years and sort of just have better capacity to secure public funding. This is money for tribes. The first round of grant announcements is expected very soon. The grant guidelines were put together with a lot of input and engagement of tribes and tribal entities. The Deputy Secretary Geneva Thompson, who, if you haven't met, I hope you guys get to know her, or maybe she's already spoken to this group. She's just done a wonderful job, I think, in leading this effort for the Resources Agency. Okay, where am I going here? I would also like to just sort of put a pin on the policy work that's done in tandem with the funding work. Melanie mentioned the AB 22, or actually, I think it was SB 337, which enshrines the executive order and makes the sort of state commitment to 30 by 30 now part of the state, so it's codified. It's not just resting in an executive order that is subject to potential unwinding in a new administration. That's really exciting. And then this is sort of on the wonky sort of financing side. The governor also just recently signed in September AB 590 into law, which is it authorizes state funding agencies to release up to 25% of a grant or contract in advance. This really starts to resolve a financing issue that many nonprofits and tribal entities, particularly smaller equity groups and tribal entities, have encountered, where they're getting this great state funding, but then they're presented with the grant agreement that says, oh, by the way, all of this funding gets dispersed on a reimbursement basis. So they have to then figure out a way to finance that reimbursement period, which is really, really kind of tricky for a lot of organizations. I've done a lot of loan work to try and fill that financing gap, but it's not the best way to do it. This doesn't apply to acquisition work, which gets funded in escrow. That's all provided at the closing. But for projects like planning projects, research projects, restoration projects, all of those types of projects, capital improvement projects, that this issue has really bedeviled a lot of good nonprofits that are trying to get good work done. I'd also mention Pathway 8.1 calls for coordination of efforts among state departments and conservancies. This is something we as sort of stakeholders always want to see, and I think we never are totally happy that we're seeing it. CNRA, the Resources Agency, is working behind the scenes through regular meetings and reports with departments and conservancies that receive all that money to coordinate it, so that's very exciting as well. Okay, so final slide. No, what am I? I am just not on my slides. So just a few words about philanthropy. Philanthropy and private funders are sharing in the enthusiasm and momentum of 30 by 30. Many, like the Moore Foundation, are providing grant funding for acquisitions that leverage public investments, which is what the agencies are really looking for. Several foundations and funders have also provided funding for the state's 30 by 30 effort through Resources Legacy Fund, which again, we have used under our collaborative agreement, and we prioritize that funding based on what the Resources Agency says their high priorities are. So that's that's really great. Foundations also, such as the Packard Foundation, the Moore Foundation, regularly provide low-cost financing to nonprofits and tribal entities across the state to bridge finance, not just this reimbursement thing I was just talking about, but also if acquisitions need to close before state funding is available, foundations are providing low-interest financing to make sure that those can close on time and nonprofits aren't losing those projects. Also, a particular focus of R11 is to provide capacity building, mentoring, technical capacity and early project development to support to nonprofits and tribal entities. This is the money that doesn't get covered by public funding and is really critical to teeing up projects that then can position themselves to compete for public funding. So we're trying to provide sort of money funding for those types of projects, always fundraising so that we can increase that pot to deploy more. But that's a way that we found to be very catalytic in terms of our ability to sort of engage with stakeholders who are actually doing this work on the ground. And then just as a final comment, the Resources Agency is working closely with philanthropy. They know they need to be collaborative in order to maximize outcomes. So it's been, actively participating in meetings with foundations and business organizations to find ways to collaborate and expand on public-private partnerships. And with that, I know I'm running out of time, and I should actually finally get to this. Questions?
Great. That was really important context for a side of the discussion that we don't normally get to hear about. And so I really appreciate that context. I'm curious if RLF has inspired other private donors, foundations because of your great work. Have you leveraged your skills and abilities and inspired others to get to the table on 30 by 30?
Well, we're certainly always doing outreach to do that. We're always having conversations within funders groups and with, sort of one-on-one with funders, and trying to line up their priorities with how it fits within the many pathways. And that's the beauty, I think, of this framework that the state put in place, which is there's many places to sort of slot in. You don't have to just put in $1 million for an acquisition. You can help fund some restoration. You can fund some of all of this sort of pre-acquisition work. You can, there's many places you can fund, sort of preparatory work for getting monument designations. So yeah, we're definitely doing that. And then we're also very connected with the global 30 by 30 effort, Brian O'Donnell and his work. So that's been really helpful in sort of expanding our reach and with other funders as well.
How has RLF solved problems that you identified that maybe the state didn't anticipate in terms of funding gaps? It seems like RLF is on the cutting edge of solutions. So I wanted to offer you the opportunity to say we're solving these problems.
Well, like in our public-private partnerships, what we really try to do is come in early with the agency and help them sort of strategically plan whatever initiative we're working on, in this case 30 by 30, and help them. Usually we're usually similarly sort of thinking through what needs to be done. And then we can sit down and look at, this is what the state can pay for, this is what they can't, but really to make this a very successful effort. If philanthropy could bring this much money in for these purposes, then it can really be a successful effort. I mean, that's really, to me, the secret sauce. And then the other, I think, really important part is to keep us at the table through implementation and to really drive an implementation plan. Because if you don't have an implementation plan, again, what you have are the recommendations that sit on a shelf.
That's right. That's essential. Gloria has a question that I'm not entirely sure is directed at you, but we'll start with you. Does 30 by 30 as codified defined natural land? And does the land need to be undisturbed? Are there criteria for biological resources in order to qualify?
Well, there's the definition of what is a conserved acre is in the Pathways document. That's the best place. It doesn't have to be pristine land. It's not wilderness land. It's got to have attributes, and it meets certain levels of protection So it's not every land that is a publicly owned lands. For example, many BLM owned lands that allow for development of sort of oil and gas or other purposes would not be counted. So there are sort of pretty specific definitions of conserved lands in the pathways document. And this would be a great question for the folks at CNRA at the agency to answer, because I just remember months and months of going over word by word what that definition is. And it continues to befuddle many relative to which line do you sort of fall on? Is it conserved or not? Does it count or not? But I think that's the best I can do on that.
Great, and I'll add to that in terms of how the state of California has defined conserved, it is by far the most strict definition, even internationally. So how we have landed in terms of what gets counted as a 30 by 30 conserved acre is a strict measure. So I'm going to wrap up the presentation side of things, and then we'll just focus simply on the Q&A. So I will pause to encourage everybody, submit your questions, and we'll go through those one at a time. And as I wrap things up, you have an opportunity to do that. So Julie, thank you so much for that information on funding sources, philanthropy, and your work. I appreciate that. And for those that don't know, Julie serves on the 30 by 30 Partnership Coordinating Committee, which I also serve on. So that is how I was able to get Julie in line in this presentation panel. So I appreciate that. So in terms of questions for the group, we're hitting those shortly, but thank you to Matthew, Tori, and Julie for your time today. And I will encourage everybody to stay informed on 30 by 30 through the state. You can sign up through the California Natural Resource Agency 30 by 30 list, and their emails that are sent out, I'm going to say once or twice a month, depending on how many workshops they're offering, provides content on webinars, grants, programs, public comment periods, all sorts of things. And, oh, come on, slides. There we go. So thanks for joining us. At this point, we'll head over to the questions directly. So I appreciate the questions that have come in. I know some questions have been answered already, but I've been keeping a running list myself. So we're going to hop back over to Tori. One question specifically related to selecting properties. When it comes to strategy for, let's say, a property adjacent to a state park or a national forest, it's normally existing in holdings that are being considered, or building on the reserve system, or creating a wildlife corridor. Those same criteria don't fit for an urban acquisition. So what are some of the criteria that you use to select a property to go after?
That's a great question. I mean, a lot of it is kind of what I talked about in terms of community priorities and then just availability. So we don't, we kind of have to, we can't be too picky, but we also need to make sure that it's a site that makes sense. So oftentimes we'll settle for like good enough. If it's got like great, like surrounded by homes, good kind of street frontage so that there's high visibility, and then the potential to do, something bigger than, like, I would say like the smallest park I would want to build would probably be like 10,000 square feet. So like something 10,000 square feet and above. So if it meets all those criteria, then we will kind of look and see if we can figure it out. I do think that urban greening projects have the potential to really meaningfully fulfill 30 by 30 priorities, especially around kind of bringing habitat and greening into neighborhoods where people don't typically have them. An example is an elementary school that we are working on greening now. The principal developed a 30-foot by 50-foot California coastal sage scrub habitat, and this is in view of downtown LA in a neighborhood that has 40,000 people living within a half-mile of the school. And they have had burrowing owls show up. They have had all of these other, like they've had endangered species show up. They're an iBird, eNaturalist. I'm getting all the acronyms mixed up, but they're a hot spot. And so if you build it, they will come. And so I believe that there's a lot of value for, it doesn't matter the size as long as it's planned and implemented in a way that makes sense for California native plants to create that habitat. And then also I think, kind of connecting back to Matthew's conversation, I think that looking at how we can design and build these urban parks, but also include harvesting gardens or like ceremony spaces or other places that bring that meaning, the habitat, the connection to nature into these very urban communities and, support kind of community building in lots of different ways. And so if I were to go down the list of 30 by 30, I won't because I'll take too long, but I would say that we can like check each of those boxes pretty well on the urban side. I think what we really need is funding. And that's kind of what Julie was bringing up, I think is so critical. And RLF does an amazing job of like working with partners to help bring in funding and has played a critical role in bond funding, but that's what we need. We can't do these projects without funding.
Excellent. And for those of you who haven't converted square feet to acreage, 10,000 square feet is about a quarter acre. So now you have a little bit of context. Matthew, let's head over to you for a question to follow up on your presentation. This connection with the land is integral to your tribe, to every tribe. And we've lost that connection because of urbanization, colonization. What is your primary goal in terms of connecting people to the land? You also had mentioned food, and my guess is we're missing opportunities there as well.
Yeah, our perspective is it's important to all humans, not just tribal components. That's one of the big things, is that we've all been separated from this relationship. And so by having these urban community gardens, and this is something that we're currently doing right now in with the community out in why am I blanking on their name? I'll think of their name. I always think Hacienda Heights, but it's not. It's Highland Park. I'm sorry, Highland Park, where they have, their own community gardens, and we are going out there and teaching these different treatments that you can do, such as simple acne treatments you can do from some of our sages, where you just steam treat your face and then able to freeze that liquid and then now make it into ice cubes, and then you apply that ice cube of tea to your acne, and this is for teenagers, so they don't have to use these harmful chemicals. These are just simple treatments that can be done from an urban community garden. And when folks think community garden, they always think of plants that are crops and things of that sort. But you can actually have our native plants be this garden, and not only will the humans get benefited, but just like Tori was saying, you're going to have all these other ecological benefits that are going to be incorporated, because the birds will find it, the pollinators will find it, all of these components will find it because they need it. We need to support them out there. And so just implementing into community so that the community can now get these benefits and learn about it. That will allow them to then protect areas that are bigger, that are actually the linking, you know, habitats between different components that we need to protect. So it's this sort of engagement, just having these community areas will be the areas that we engage. And then we can create products, the community can benefit from these products, and it could sustain itself just by having it available.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like there's some synergy between the different pathways here today that I didn't even anticipate. So I appreciate that. And we're looking forward to your nonprofit really getting off the ground. Julie, we're going to wrap up with a question. We've got about a minute left. What can you tell us in terms of creative financing? Are you open to having conversations with organizations that are struggling with creative financing mechanisms?
Absolutely. I mean, there is a role for debt. It can be a difficult conversation with the board, but if you can get really cheap debt from a foundation that's what they're offering, I think you should explore that. There's also some tax credit work that I think is I worked on a North Coast project that brought in a Western Rivers Conservancy project that brought in private equity through a tax credit program for sort of socioeconomically disadvantaged communities that meet certain, you know, income barriers. That's a bit kind of sophisticated, complicated, but you know, I think there's some places in the southern part of the state where that probably could place in. But I always feel like you don't take those sort of more sophisticated steps until you like take it out your first loan to buy a property or do something on the ground on a property you own. So happy to I can sort of sniff out whether a particular project could use a loan, could repay it, or if there's something else. So if somebody wants to give me a call, they should just get in touch with me.
Perfect. We will provide your contact information on the website as well. So at this point, we're out of time. I do want to thank Matthew, Tori, and Julie for participating today. You provided a wealth of knowledge on your topics. Thank you also to all of our participants for your joining us on this last webinar for FHBP in our 30 by 30 series. I'm going to encourage everyone to fill out the survey that you get from Zoom. If it doesn't show up for some reason, which has happened, know that I will be emailing it out. We'd love to know how this information helps you. And so that email will be coming as a follow-up. Everything will be posted onto our YouTube channel probably within about 24 hours, assuming I have no technical difficulties. And we'll do one final email to everybody that attended, providing all of the workshop details and information. So thank you everyone for participating in this workshop series. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.